There we go. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Spirituality for Your Mother with me, Beck Cranford, and my honored guest today is Rabbi Mitch Cohen, who I had the pleasure of meeting, I think in 2019, and then and had also heard of him in interfaith circles here in Atlanta, and then in 2020 we met up right after Rayshard Brooks was murdered, and we had a Black Lives Matter interfaith prayer gathering. And I met him there and we just started talking. And soon later, he became my spiritual director. So I've been journeying with Rabbi Mitch for about 6 years. He's my rabbi. I guess you could say I'm his Talmud in some ways. Having said all that, I'm going to shut my face now and let Mitch just kind of give you a little bit of overview of himself before we dive into the subject today.
Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, whoever's listening. I first want to thank Beck for inviting me to speak and share some of what I've learned over the past 35 years. Start off, yes, I'm a rabbi, but no, I no longer serve a community. I did serve a community for 16 years up in North Georgia. But after I started doing so much spiritual work, particularly in my other career, which is being an internal family systems practitioner and trauma coach, and also a grief counselor related to loss to suicide, I just realized that everybody feels the same way. Everybody grieves the same way. Everybody has the same trauma responses. And everybody has the same possibility for healing, and I just couldn't stay in my lane anymore. So I'm highly informed by the perennial wisdom taught by many religious traditions now, and serve people as a non-religion specific spiritual director and still as a trauma counselor and grief coach.
Well, thank you for that, sharing a little bit about some of the things that you do, Mitch. And you've helped me in my life tremendously. And I know I have some colleagues that are in ministry in different denominations that and different faiths as well that come to see you. So I'm so grateful. And Mitch is also involved here in Atlanta with a interfaith spiritual direction program too. So he's just constantly teaching and giving and pouring out of his heart, and helping other people to heal. Um, so Mitch, let me tell you the reason I reached out to you is because I wanted to talk a little bit about Gilgul and the notion and afterlife and Olam Haba and within Judaism. A lot of my friends who were raised Christian have heard kind of Christian fundamentalist versions of the afterlife and really don't understand, the Jewish Jesus. And I know in the Kabbalistic tradition, a lot of that stuff from like the Zohar and things later kind of came about in like the Middle Ages, but Jesus talks a little bit on some things that seem a little bit like reincarnation when we're looking at scripture. He calls John the Baptist Elijah, and then there's some other situations in which the dead kind of come again in different. Um, there's a kind of before the ascension, you see um, Elijah and Moshe and some others kind of come, and then Peter runs to Jesus, and he's like, should I build like a Sukkot here? Should I build him like little houses to kind of hang out here? And Jesus is kind of like, no, you're kind of missing the point. But there's some references to maybe things not being as cut and dry, or like the afterlife, like not being what we think it might be. So I'd love for you to share with the audience and with me a little bit on Gilgul and just some things that you've learned over your life, and maybe even some views that you might have about what life after death might look like, possibly, or what you hope it might look like. And yeah, give us some insight.
Sure. So I want to start by saying um, one of the first graduate courses I had to take it was called The Religions of Biblical Israel, but it was really about all of those religions before the Israelite religion. Like, I don't use the term Judaism until about 100 years before Jesus was born. And that was because the Romans came up with the term Judean. Right. So before that, they were just the Israelites, and the religion they practiced was a sacrificial cult known as the Israelite religion. And so was everybody else who came before them. And so everybody had a temple, everybody had a sacrificial cult. The difference was everybody else had a pantheon of gods, whereas the Israelites had the one God, which I always found, I mean, revelatory in and of itself. That somehow 4,000 years ago, a group of people came together and said, maybe there's only one. And, that created the third oldest religion that still exists in its form, and that's Judaism. Hindu and Zoroastrianism are the two oldest still in practice. So I believe, and I learned at that time, that religion was created by humans. And I know that might be a challenge for a lot of us to hear, but there's two reasons why we did so. 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, let's say, people couldn't explain why certain natural phenomenon happened, like a solar eclipse or a volcano eruption, right? Or a tidal wave, right? So all of this ambiguous, anonymous thing had to be caused by something, right? So they blamed it on gods, right? The second thing I believe is kind of what we're going to talk about is fear of death. So you've got two things that really created religion. That was the fear of unexplainable phenomenon and the fear of death and what happens after. And I hold true to that to this day, that even though I still practice pretty much the basics of Jewish ethics, which would be the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, which is in the Mishnah part of the Talmud. And of course, to me, the only 10 verses that matter in all of the Hebrew Bible. And that's Leviticus 19:9 to Leviticus 19:18. Leviticus 19:9 is leave the corners of your field for the less fortunate. And of course, 19:18 is love your neighbor as yourself. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in between. Leave the corners of leave the vineyards not bare for people to glean, and don't put a stumbling block for the blind. I'm going to paraphrase here, give people feedback, but don't draw blood from doing so, which a certain president that we both know doesn't know how to do that. He likes to draw blood, right? Psychic blood. So now let's talk about the question at hand. So first of all, Judaism, I said, is a 4,000-year-old religion. And, everybody talks about, well, what's the 30,000-foot description of what Judaism is? And a lot of people scratch their heads, oh my God, it's going to take me hours to explain. I can boil it down into just a few sentences. Number one, Judaism is a way of life tradition that's sourced in our past, mostly agricultural. Almost all of the Jewish holidays are tied to an agricultural event. Number two, it is a function of our deeds and actions in the here and now. And number three, no emphasis on what happens after we die. So that's really Judaism in a nutshell. It's a religion, it's a way of life, a way of living one's life that's sourced in our past history as an agricultural nomadic people. It's highly based on the deeds and actions that we do right here and now, with no emphasis on what happens after we live. Now, that opens up a big question mark, right? Well, the deeds and actions in the here and now, that's easy, right? Because Judaism also doesn't have any belief in original sin, which I believe is the most toxic teaching in all religious teachings. And that was Augustine, we can thank for that. He was challenged, I want to say his name was Pagalius, I think an English monk, had a Roman name. But unfortunately, Augustine won out the debate and original sin came into play. So Judaism doesn't have that. In fact, the Hebrew word for sin, which is chet, simply means to miss the mark. So, that's a validation of our humanity because we all mess up. We all make mistakes. But it means if you miss the mark, is you have the opportunity to re-aim and shoot again. All right. So I love that. And there are two other definitions of sin, and they're legal. So one of them is civil acts. And if you harm your neighbor's cow, you got to give him one of your cows. If you knock down one of your neighbor's olive trees, which happens a lot right now, don't even get me started on the current Israeli government, um, you have to replace it. And then, of course, unfortunately, there's criminal law. Hold on a quick second. And that is, if you murder somebody, then, you have to pay the price. Now, everybody thinks, well, an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth. But, and even though there's 5 different ways to kill in the Hebrew Bible, it was almost never invoked. And that's because the sages of 2,000 years ago had the wisdom to debate in the Talmud that there'd be, the panel of judges, the Sanhedrin, right? Um, and there was the Katan, the small panel, which were 31 judges, and there was the Gadol, and this was 71 judges. So a criminal case went before all 71, and the odds of a majority of 71 approving the death penalty for any reason was little or none. So it was almost never invoked. But it doesn't mean that, if you killed somebody, you got into an argument with your neighbor and they accidentally died, you had to take care of his family for the rest of their lives. So, it wasn't, you're not off the hook, right? So there's that. Now, the Olam Haba, where does that even come from? And it means the world to come. Literally, that's what Olam Haba means. So in the Hebrew Bible, we first hear of Sheol, right? Jacob says when he hears Joseph was torn apart, oh, just take me down to Sheol. Well, there was nothing down because anybody who's been to Israel or that area knows that it's very rocky. You didn't have backhoes, so you couldn't dig a 6-foot deep hole. At best, you just cleared the ground enough to put a shrouded body in and covered it with rocks. That's where the whole idea of a tombstone, by the way, comes from. When Jacob buried Rachel on the road, he put up a monument. He did the same thing. He dug the shallow hole, put Rachel's body in, covered her with stones so animals wouldn't take her away, and then put up a monument so that that spot would be known to whoever walked by that road. That's where the tombstone comes from. But that was it. There was no, like, where did Rachel go? Her body went in the ground. Now, there are references in the Hebrew Bible of he went back to his fathers, right? So that does lead one to believe that there's some realm beyond the physical realm that we know of. Or it was just hopeful thinking, right? We don't know. But now we get to Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah. And Kabbalah in Hebrew means that which is received. So like all mystics, it's the experience of the divine, whether it's in meditation, whether it's in nature, whether it's just being in awe. And by the way, the Hebrew word that's misinterpreted as fear God is simply be in awe of God. So we don't have that teaching either to fear God. It's just to be in awe of the unexplainable and all the beauty of nature. So we have Sheol, right? Then we see this word start popping in called Gehenna, right? Gehenna was the garbage dump outside of the south gate of the temple. That's where they took the trash. And what did they do with the trash? They burned it. So the ancients took this idea of a burning trash pile outside the south gate of the temple, took what the Greeks taught about Hades, and these weren't Jews, by the way. These would be the people that followed the teachings, those who followed the way, or those the follower of the anointed one, all of the followers of Jesus after his death, but before Christianity, which was 334 Constantine. So there was a good 300 years of the followers of Jesus living in communes or living together, but living the teachings. None of the dogma or stuff that we see today. That all came out of the Nicene Council. So, so we got Sheol, we got Gehenna, the garbage dump. All right. We have being gathered to their fathers. Moses, goes on the mountain, doesn't get in the promised land, and he's gathered to his kin or gathered to his fathers. So, that we look at as just metaphoric for we don't know.
There's a translation in the English New Testament of Jesus having this discussion about a poor man named Lazarus and
Yeah.
a rich man, and he talks about something about Abraham's bosom. Is that anything in Judaism, or do you think that came later? What is that about?
I don't know the answer to that. That must have come later. It must have been more in the parables because Jesus realized, and I've done a lot of studying of Jesus, and this may sound strange to some of your readers, but I believe Jesus was the second most enlightened human being that ever walked the face of the earth. The other is Buddha. All right, so when we can take our Jewish fear and also our legacy trauma of 2,000 years of persecution by Christians, if we can just have that soften back and say, all right, let me look at what the guy taught. It's just beautiful stuff. Everything in Matthew chapter 5 is sourced to a Jewish teaching because Jesus was Jewish. He didn't know anything else but Judaism. I've been to the Church of Holy Sepulchre 7 times in Jerusalem, where the so-called crucifixion site and the caves where he was buried, assuming that's the accurate location. Benefit of the doubt, let's say it is, right? It's a very powerful place. There's a lot of wonderful energy in that place, but there's a stone where his body was washed. Well, that's what's called a tahara in Judaism. You have to be buried within 24 to 48 hours. And in ancient times, they had to, right? There was no way to chill the body or embalm, so you had to get it in the ground quickly. But the first thing they did was a ritual washing and a wrapping in a shroud. And that is clearly described of what happened with Jesus. The Romans killed him on a Friday morning, knowing that he had to be buried before the Sabbath, which was sundown on a Friday, right? And the reason why they did that is they wanted buried quickly, Shabbat the next day where people didn't do anything, and hopefully by Sunday their anger would have quelled. The Romans knew about how the Jews practiced. And so it's very intentional that he was murdered on that Friday morning or Good Friday. So now, Kabbalah, where did that come from? So there's one school of thought, and I do abide by this. So, there's so much stuff out there. Some of it is really good, some of it is real garbage. So, any Kabbalah teaching, this is just my opinion. So, I don't want to trigger anybody out there, but there's a group called the Kabbalah Center, right? CENTRE. I would encourage people to avoid that place like the plague. I never heard of them until around, I don't know, 2000, maybe 99. One of my students who I was teaching at the time, I used to teach a 20-week introduction to Judaism class, and she wasn't Jewish. She was curious, knew that I loved Kabbalah, and I had taught another class that she took. And so, oh my God, I ran into these people at the Kabbalah Center. So I never heard of that. So I started looking it up. This is the rudimentary research on a computer, right? So I got some names of the Berg family, and that got me suspicious that everybody had a black turtleneck and a black yarmulke on their head, and they were all the Bergs. So it's like entire family. So I finally found a place in Miami, and there was a phone number, and I called, and I got the so-called rabbi, and I asked him, where did you get smicha is a Hebrew word for laying of the hands. Where did you get ordained as a rabbi? and he danced around the question. That is a big red flag for me. And I kept on probing, where did you study Kabbalah? Danced around the question. Might have said something like, "Oh, the burrs are just have a direct contact with the Ein Sof." That's the Hebrew word for without end, the infinite one. All right. And so I told my student, run like hell. Now, I was fortunate to study in graduate school with Dr. Byron Sherwin, who was a rabbi. He's passed away, I guess, about 5 or 6 years ago. Must have been in his 90s. He wrote a book, Introduction to Kabbalah. I think its subtitle is The Real Kabbalah. And his writing and his research is authentic, as is any work that Daniel Matt has done, M-A-T-T. If anybody were going to read books, the other group of people who I do think is pretty authentic is the Jewish Renewal Movement. So David Cooper wrote a book called God is a Verb, and I love that. Right? So God is not static. God is ever occurring. So if anybody want to read that book, I led a book study on that one book that lasted 3 years. One book. It took us a lot to get through it, and a lot of experiential stuff that I wanted people to do. So it's said that manuscripts of the earliest teachings were written by a Bar Yochai, was his name, up in Tzvat, which is up in the mountains in northern Israel. It's the highest point. And to this day, it's the center of very religious Jews who practice Kabbalah. His cave is nearby, and he has a sect of Hasidim that worship at the cave. But it wasn't really written down until Moses de Leon in the 1500s in Spain. Right? And that's who wrote the Zohar, the Book of Splendor. And it's written in code. So if somebody were going to say, "Oh, I want to read the Zohar," and they get a real translation from the Aramaic, like how Daniel Matt did it, it's going to sound weird. All right. But all Kabbalah is mystical commentary on what's in the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, from the creation story of Isaac Luria, which is another, that strain of Kabbalah is one that I follow, Lurianic Kabbalah, it's called. He was also around in the 1500s. Actually, I want to change my dates here. I think Moses de Leon wrote the Zohar in the 1300s or the 13th century.
Okay.
Now, you might want to check me on that. I
Yeah.
apologize for not remembering.
No, you're fine. I have a question.
Yeah,
You said it was kind of like the esoteric,
yeah,
the biblical interpretation of like Pushat,
yeah.
Remez, Drosh, Sod, has that always been in effect, or did that come about like, do you think that was a later thing? And do you think the Kabbalists were more into Sod with biblical interpretation?
Yeah, that would have more grown out of Kabbalah. And it's made its way into all of Judaism now. And so what that means is Pesha is the first level. That's the literal meaning of text. And that's like putting a toe in the water of a pool. Then the next level is metaphoric, right? Then below that is allegory. What does this story mean allegorically? And then finally is the mystical, right? And the acronym from all those letters is equal to the Hebrew word for orchard. Because what does an orchard offer? Fruit of wisdom. Right. And that's how I was taught to study Torah, not the literal. Even little stories, we can do a whole nother segment on some of the great stories like Jacob wrestling with the Ish Elohim, the divine being, total metaphor. He was wrestling with a shadow. He wasn't wrestling with an angel because the Hebrew word for angel was not in the text. So that's a whole nother thing. The name change is a life transformation, transformation, not transportation. So Moses de Leon wrote it down. Then Isaac Luria came up with the creation story that makes total sense. Daniel Matt wrote a book called The Big Bang. No, oh God, I'm spacing that now in that title. God and the Big Bang. It is. It's God and the Big Bang. So Lurianic story of creation back in the 1500s preceded what in the 1940s was theorized as the Big Bang Theory. So the whole idea of an explosion creating the universe, that was in Judaism for 500 years already. And again, that's a topic of another discussion. But I want to get back to the Olam Haba in Gilgul and show how it is still done in Jewish practice today, and most Jews have no idea that that's the ritual that they're practicing. So Gilgul means circles of return, right? And so what the belief from Kabbalah is, upon death, the soul leaves the body, and it takes 7 days for the soul to kind of like, everybody's hurting. I want to go back, but they're drawn to this beautiful feeling of love and warmth. So it's sort of a 7-day time of confusion, desire to stay to comfort their loved ones, and a desire to move on into the pure love and light. Right. And during this time, there is a life review. You get to see all the great contributions you've made to people, and you feel the love that they felt. And then you get to see all of the hurtful and wounding things that you've done to people, and you get to feel that as well. Right. And then the soul enters Gehenna. So it's drawing from that word Gehenna, but this is a temporary place. And during this time, the soul is purified. I mean, there is teaching that the free will choice of hurtful deeds that we did in life kind of gets burnished off the soul. And hence that's where the quote unquote fire from the trash yard comes into the teaching of Gehenna, I'm sorry. So it's a temporary place. And after about a year, the soul is purified and a choice is put on the table. When we are born, remember in Judaism, life begins when the soul is breathed into the infant just before birth. It's right there in the creation story when God breathed the Nishmat Chaim, the breath of life, into Adam. So that's when we believe life starts, not at conception. That's biology, not theology. Right? So the soul comes in to all of us with a life mission. And if we fulfill that mission, we've done everything we were supposed to do during the life, then at this transition period after Gehenna, purification, it either goes on through 7 levels to join with the pure love and light of God. Right? There's no word heaven for that. It's just in the infinite realm. That's how I like to describe it. We're in the finite realm, and the infinite realm is where the Ein Sof is. If it didn't complete its mission, then it gets reincarnated and comes back and is breathed into a new infant before birth with the same plan for what they're supposed to do. So that in a nutshell really is what is Gehenna, what is the Olam Haba, what is Gilgul, circles of return. And my own theology has evolved over many years. I'm 68 now. It was really when I discovered my current spiritual teacher, and everybody should have a spiritual teacher. I don't care who you are, even my spiritual teacher has spiritual teachers, right? His name is Rabbi Rami Shapiro. And I every book he's written, I've become friends with him. I've hosted him at my house for a couple of workshops in Atlanta. He's having some health challenges, so he doesn't leave his home in I think he's in Franklin, Tennessee. And but yeah, his teaching is what made me realize that about 13 or 14 years ago, what I have always been and didn't realize it was a panentheist. That's my theology. So a panentheist is non-dual, right? Non-dual means there's no separation between the divine and creation in the physical world, right? So you are God manifesting as Beck. I am God manifesting as Mitch. Everybody listening is God manifesting as them. So we're all connected by the universal soul, right? That's within. And then God also is in everything natural. God is in that too. Is God perfect? No, because remember that term, God is a verb, right? When Moses asked God in Exodus, hey, what's your name? What should I tell the people? The answer was, tell them, Eiyeh Asher Eiyeh sent you. And what that's translated in most Bibles is, I am that I am, right? But Eiyeh is first person future tense. So it could also be, I will be what I will be, right? So God, that's where the title God as a verb comes from. That translation of the actual biblical Hebrew, that God is evolving as we evolve. Right. So, that works for me. Now, how does that align with what I just said, right? At death, we go through Gehenna, soul's purified, and it joins with God. The answer is I'm okay with not knowing, because panentheists also leave room for mystery. It's like, all right, so God is manifesting as Beck, God is manifesting as Mitch, manifesting as Hannah, manifesting as your daughter, God is manifesting as all of us. We have free will choice that is, as you and I would agree with, highly influenced by the wounding and traumas that we face in life. And that pretty much drives our less than pleasant behaviors. So free will choice is big in Judaism. There's no predestination. God's not a puppeteer. Um, and but reincarnation, that part of it really works for me. And Rami Shapiro draws from a Hindu teaching that I also love, and that is all of us are waves on the ocean. Just like there's individual waves, if you fly in a plane and you go over the water, you see thousands of waves rippling. Well, that represents each of us. And we're floating on top of the ocean. And we're made of the ocean. But we see the waves. We don't see what's below. And at some point, the wave comes into the shore, crashes, and gets pulled back into the ocean, never to arise the way it was before. Right? So that's my belief of reincarnation. It kind of takes all of it. I live my life, you live your life. At some point, my biological life's going to end. My wave's going to return to the ocean. But what is the ocean that we can't see? That's the divine. So every wave that's you and me and everyone else is a divine manifestation of divinity, of the ocean. So I don't have a problem with reincarnation. Now, Kabbalah does teach the transmigration of souls, which means we tend to come back with the people that we were with before, either current lifetime or a lifetime before. I'm open to that. My late wife, who died in 2013, tragically, I mean, we loved each other. So there wasn't, and I mean, we had a romantic relationship. But in a lot of ways, sometimes we felt like, because she also very much believed in this. She said, I bet we were siblings in a past life. Because, the way we needle each other and we give each other crap, but we still love each other. I said, yeah. I said, you know how we got the same crap, so we understand each other's crap? I said, yeah. It's like we had the same parents before. Um, so I always thought that. I always thought that, yeah, maybe we did. And so this whole idea of meeting a soulmate actually has some teaching in Kabbalah. That we come back with the exact right soul. And if we get divorced, that wasn't the right one.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say like, and hopefully most of my followers have, I mean, I've attempted to explain that Judaism isn't monolithic, or just like
Right.
Christianity isn't monolithic. But would you say that the majority of Hasidic, like very Orthodox Jewish folks believe in Gilgul, and even some of the, Reconstructionists believe in Gilgul as well?
Well, it's a great question. I would say the organization called Chabad, right? Chabad. Some people say Chabad because they don't know how to pronounce it. I have a new we hired somebody before I retired, and he went to University of Georgia, and they have a Chabad place. And he said, "Yeah, I used to go to the Chabad house, and they welcomed me with open arms." I said, "Of course they welcome me. They don't turn anybody away, and the food's pretty good, I hear." But then I had to correct him. This Chabad, it's like clearing popcorn out of your throat. So they're the Lubavitchers, and they are a sect of Hasidim that do believe and follow Kabbalah. So they likely do embrace Gilgul. Now, up into the 1600s, the majority of Jews in the world did believe in mysticism, Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. But there was a guy, Sabbatai Tzvi. Just like there's always, you go on the street, guy claims he's a Messiah, right? Probably schizophrenic, but says they're the Messiah. And Sabbatai Tzvi had almost three-quarters of Jews following his teachings. But at some point, he declared that he was the Messiah. So this was during the Ottoman Empire, and he was captured. And the great Sultan said, okay, Sabbatai Tzvi, if you're the Messiah, then we're going to kill you and you're going to immediately ascend to heaven, right? And he kind of, well, I don't know about that. He's caught in his lie, right? And so he was given the choice of being killed as a Messiah or converting to Islam. So he converted to Islam, right? I get that. I don't want to be killed, right? And so he converted, and a lot of his followers followed suit. So after that, those Jews who remained started to think this Kabbalah stuff was dangerous and it made you go crazy. Here's this wacko who decides he's going to be Messiah. And then he converts out, of Judaism to save his life. So then it got kind of squelched, and Hasidim started to become ultra Orthodox, strict application of Jewish law, except for this one sect, the Lubavitchers, right, from Lubavitch. I can't remember if that's Poland or the Ukraine or Lithuania. But that's where they're from. And and so they still follow the teachings of Kabbalah. One of the best books I read was by a Chabad rabbi about 45 years ago. And of course, now I'm spacing out on the name, but of the book. But it was really, really good. I was surprised how good it was. He really nailed it in easy to understand language. And, he had the black hat and the payas, and he strict dietary laws and strict observance of the Sabbath. Um, but lived according to the teachings of Jewish mysticism. So right now, to answer, yeah, the Jewish renewal movement still teaches a lot of Kabbalah in their liturgy. Um, I said
Is
Jewish renewal, right? And
is the
Jewish
Jewish renewal, is that the like the birth is that the birthright group?
No, that's a different organization. That's not by a particular denomination or movement within Judaism. Jewish renewal is a small movement, right? It started in San Francisco in the late 60s by a couple of Chabad rabbis. And Rab Zalman is Zalman is considered the leader who started the movement. And he just wanted to be very open and welcoming to to any Jew, whether you learned anything, whether you practiced anything, whether your parent was Jewish, another one wasn't. He didn't care. He was just loving, and then he would teach, these teachings of Kabbalah, and he drew a lot of young people. Think about it. This is 66, 67, the summer of love. And and then Shlomo Karlbach also was another one. And he created a lot of chants and a lot of drumming and a lot of guitar to Jewish prayers. And so between the two of them, they really grew the movement. Um, the Reconstructionist Jews, who've been around since the early late 20s, early 30s. Very interesting movement. I actually like the movement, and it depends on the rabbi. Josh Lesser, great rabbi here in Atlanta, who's no longer serving the community. He's on to other things. He incorporated a lot of Kabbalah into his liturgy and his teaching. And yeah, it was a shame that he left, but I support him for the ventures that he's on now too. But we both left our pulpits, right? Um, Reform Judaism, there are a lot of rabbis that incorporate Kabbalah into their teaching as well. The conservative movement, not so much, and the Orthodox movement, definitely not. I once had an Orthodox rabbi challenge me, when I was asking questions about Kabbalah, and he's like, "You shouldn't even talk about it." I said, "What are you talking about?" I've been studying it for at that point already 10 or 15 years. He said, "It's dangerous. It'll make you go crazy like Sabbatai Tzvi." So I just realized, that's his prejudice, and I never stopped studying, and I never stopped teaching.
Reminds me of the people in my Pentecostal church when I was a child, when I was talking about like wanting to go to seminary, and they were like, "Don't go to that cemetery, you're gonna become a liberal." Like they were so worried, like, "Ooh."
And here you are, became a liberal.
Oh man, wild stuff. Well, Mitch, thank you so much. You've got compassionate presence here in Atlanta. That's like cp-atl.com.
.com.
How is that the best way for people to get a hold of you if they want to maybe work with you,
Yeah,
possibly do some spiritual direction with you, maybe process some grief, or just find out more about you? What's the best place to reach out?
that is the best place. So my organization is Compassionate Presence LLC, and the website address, just like you said, is www.cp-atl.com.
That's awesome.
Um, and it's got different tabs for what people want. I have found through serendipity, again, divine coincidence, right? That I work with a lot of women in particular who've been through a lot of complex trauma. And I feel it in my heart that my duty on this planet is to be the safe elder male
Mm,
to help them heal.
mm, yeah.
Especially, God forbid, it was sexual abuse, and far too many women were sexually assaulted or abused. And so I do a lot of work in that area. And internal family systems is the modality that I use for that.
Thank you
Um,
so much. Yeah, thank you for your work.
yeah,
Any projects you want to talk about right now? Anything that's bringing you some excitement or anything you'd
yeah.
like them to know?
Yeah. So the other area that I'm doing a lot of work is religious abuse and trauma. I mentioned the original sin, trauma, and I'm working on a book with another IFS therapist. It's on religious abuse and trauma, internal family systems as a healing pathway. So we're not looking to get people to stop being in their religion, right? We are helping people to heal the toxic teachings of their childhood, or God forbid, the abuses that they faced by mostly highly controlling religions.
Yeah.
Um, not all Christians are highly controlling, right?
Yeah.
But too many of them are,
Yeah.
especially here in the US.
Well, this is great. I really appreciate your time. I'm so grateful. We'll make sure that we publish all your links and we'll have you back on for spirituality for your mother. Maybe we can talk about spiritual abuse next time or
Whatever you
something
want.
else. So I'm grateful to you today, Mitch. Last words as we exit out.
No, the world is a blessing to have you in it. I mean, your book was heartbreaking, but also hopeful, and it points to your resilience. And here you are doing the work that you do. So it is actually an honor and a blessing to know you and to have supported you and to continue walk with you.
That's my rabbi, y'all. Thanks, Mitch. We'll talk to you soon. And Mitch, if you want to hang around, I'm just going to end the recording.
Yeah.